YouTube at one point. We're still working on Miss Kalinowski's. There's something corrupt with the file that they're fixing. But any questions in general before we start? We're good? All right, today it is with great pleasure I'm going to introduce not only a former student of mine, but a friend now who's graduated from U of M now, right?
4 days ago.
What's that?
4 days ago.
4 days ago. And is moving on to some pretty big things, I'm sure of it. While he was here, he had a pretty big impact on this school and this community. Much of it still is felt today. So if you ever heard of the Clarkson Health Initiative and the TEDx stuff that we did for a number of years, that was all Ty Dunn and his friends in that class. He came and lectured for us last year, and I'm really excited to have him back. A lot of what he's going to go over today is going to be determined on how you guys interact with him. So if ever there was a day where you are expected to, and it's in your best benefit to participate, today is the day. Don't be shy about raising your hand and asking a question if you don't understand something, or answering questions that Ty asks you. The more we interact with each other cognitively in this process, the more you're going to get out of today's lecture. All right? Any questions on that? Let's give him a round of applause of gratitude, please.
What time is this class on?
We're going to see lunch.
42?
40.
42. All right, cool. 50 well under that.
Yes.
Good morning. Mr. Isaac invited me back to give this lecture, I guess for the second time. Significantly different than what I did last year. I tried to do too much, and this time I really kind of honed it back. Though I haven't lowered like the level of the content. I actually got some feedback from friends that are graduating or recently graduated from Michigan with me, and they're like, "Are you sure sophomores?" This is sophomores, right?
Yep.
Sophomores in high school are going to be able to handle this, and I think you guys can. But as Mr. Isley said, it's going to take you asking questions, right? Many of my friends at university come from countries where they don't ask questions, where they're not even allowed to ask questions, or they're discouraged. And having been in Mr. Isaac's class, I know it's a comfortable environment for you to ask, and so take advantage of that privilege, even though you might not realize it's a privilege right now because of where you're from and what classroom you're in. So, as Mr. Isaac said, I am Ty, or Tyler, whatever you want to call me. I studied cognitive science and computer science at the University of Michigan. Graduated on Saturday. In less than 2 weeks, I'm going to be moving to Berlin, Germany, to join a conversational artificial intelligence company called Rasa. And we'll talk more about both cognitive science and what I'm going to be doing in Berlin afterwards. Some things I'm interested in are running, backpacking, philosophy, football, a number of other things, but there's only so much room on the slide. And then, if you want to follow me, I'm usually Tyler J. Dunn. I don't know what you guys use now. I think it's Instagram, right? I'm on Instagram, so I don't think you use Facebook from what I've heard. So let's just jump into it. So we're going to start off with kind of a quick model that we're going to try and hopefully kind of get you guys to understand, and then we're going to apply it in like an abstract sense to how I'm thinking about things currently in our day and age and where the future is going to go. And then hopefully that'll take about 10 minutes, maybe a bit longer if you guys ask me good questions. And then we'll take a break. I know it's May, so you guys are tired of listening to people talk to you and you want summer to come, so we'll take a break and do whatever you want for however much time, like 3-5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll try and apply it. Because I think a big thing about thinking is like it's kind of like clouds almost, right? It just floats away unless you actually do something with it, right? Unless you actually express it to the world, you write it down, you take action on it, it doesn't mean anything, right? No matter how smart you are. Everybody knows the real smart kid, right, that has so much potential but doesn't actually do anything with it, right? And so hopefully I'll be able to convince you that I'm taking some of my thinking and actually applying it to the real world. So we're going to start off with this idea of frameworks and filters. And you don't need to know what those are quite yet. We're going to, the next 2 slides will hit on them. But the important thing to note is that the information we take in, right, our inputs are going to determine those things, right? And so every day you wake up and you're reading things, you're talking to people, you're listening to music, you're watching things on television or movies or Netflix or whatever, right? And all of that is in combination, right, with kind of all the stuff you've taken in every day, your entire life, is going to form what we're going to call frameworks and filters. So frameworks first are the models that we operate using, and we develop them based on where we focus. So to like really understand this, a good way would be thinking about as you're considering going to college, a big part of that's figuring out like what are you going to major in, what are you going to do, right? The most obvious thing with a major, right, is like what job you're going to get. But I think more importantly than that, it's going to determine how you really think about the world, right? Mr. Isley, being so invested in English, sees the world from that point of view. Mr. Drawless, being so invested in history, sees that point of view, right? And the model that they use, right, we, cognitive science, the model that I use, that we all use, is really heavily influenced by what we study, right? And sometimes that's in this major, right, kind of framework or within school or the classes that you're taking now, but sometimes it's just what you do with your free time and all of that, right? But these frameworks are going to be kind of how when something new comes up in your life, it's kind of how you're going to challenge, like, take advantage of it, you're going to do stuff, right? If you've learned a lot about history, right, you're going to know that not to invade Russia in the winter, right? Like, if you ever come across a scenario similar to that, it's going to be how you respond, right? And so where we focus kind of really determines, right? And if information comes from where we focus, that's going to determine our frameworks. And the other piece of it is filters, right? And filters cause us to see the world in a certain way. The big problem with the world today, and even before it got really big with the internet and the amount of noise, is there's just too much data for us to comprehend, right? We're not capable of processing it all, right? And so part of what we study allows us to filter the world in a certain way. Studying history allows us to filter it from a historical lens. I think you guys kind of talk about that. But even things as small as like when you go on Instagram, right, and you look through, like, you're going to be viewing these things in a certain way, right? If you have like a positive body image, right, you're going to view other people's bodies in a certain way, right? If you have a negative body image, you're going to view people's in a certain way, right? All of these things are filters, right? It's judgment that we add on to what we're actually seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling. And it's only ever a partial understanding, right? At the end of the day, there's only 24 hours, and you only have so much time to think about things. And what ends up happening, right, is you can choose 1% of the world to understand, right? And so it's really important that you figure out what is that 1% or 5% or 10% that you can't understand. All right. So does everyone understand frameworks and filters? Yeah. Can someone raise their hand and give me an example of a framework that maybe you have or that you can come up with?
I think since I've had children, there's how I frame work, my view of the world, or what I invest in the world has to do with my kids now, right? Like through from a parent's framework, right? Like everything I look at now has different implications now that I'm a parent. So prior to that, it probably was more of like the language arts framework, right? Because I was so invested in it, but my focus has changed a little bit.
And then what about like the filter aspect of that? How does that change your?
Well, I can tell you, I want the world to be a certain way for my kids, right? And so, I tend to tune out the stuff that I don't want to be invested in or see or engage in or want them to see or be engaged in based on that lens.
Yep, 100%. So as we go through this, remember, frameworks are models that we operate using, right? They're kind of how we respond to things. Filters are kind of the information we choose to pay attention to and choose not to pay attention to, right? It's what goes into our short-term memory, what goes into our long-term memory, right? And some of that is our choice, and sometimes that's our brain subconsciously operating. And so keep these two in mind as we go over kind of the foundational aspects of my frameworks and filters. So hopefully, as we do that, it'll become more concrete as to what I'm talking about. So the first one is, I don't know why these photos aren't loading, but I guess they go slowly. All mentation is computation. So mentation is just a fancy way of saying thinking, right? And the premise behind this is what we've learned in cognitive science is that all thinking is fundamentally computation, which is mathematical operation. In the same way that your computer does mathematical operation, your brain does mathematical operation. That's not to say your brain is a computer, right? So don't get that conflated. It's just this idea that we're able to do mathematical operations in silicon, electronics in your computer, or in the wetware in our brains, right, the biological, right? And those are very similar. And then in addition to that, our world is increasingly being run by algorithms, right? What are algorithms? They're just recipes. Recipes that are step-by-step processes that allow us to do something, right, to accomplish some goal. And algorithms have been around for as long as humans have been around, right? It's just nowadays we're starting to put those algorithms into code and run them on computers at scale, right? So what determines your Discover page on Instagram are algorithms, right? Nowadays, what determines if you're getting a loan or not? Algorithms, right? And these things are becoming huge parts of our lives, but these same things that are on these computers are actually how our brain operates. So you can think of these frameworks we were talking about earlier as sort of like algorithms, right? Recipes for what we're doing. And in the same way that they're implemented on computers and via computation, they're also implemented in humans via computation. At least that is the current science of how we're thinking about it. All right, any questions about this? I know we're gonna get deeper and deeper on this. You need to understand this first part in order to keep going. All right, so the basic premise is similar to computers. We're information processors, right? We take in inputs and we produce outputs. And in that, we are prediction engines. Remember, we were just talking about how we only have a partial understanding of the world? Well, despite only having a partial understanding of the world, we have to do stuff, right? We have to take actions, we have to make decisions, we have to say things, right? And how we decide, right, is we just predict. We just say, we know X amount of information, and we're going to do the best we can with what we have. And that is going to be determined not just based on what we know already, but also these inputs coming in, right? If someone comes up to you and smiles, right, and says hello, you're going to take that as input, like, oh, this is a friendly person. I'm going to also smile and say hello, right? That sort of thing, right? And this prediction engine that's going on in your brain is saying this person's probably friendly because they're approaching me in a friendly way. The next step that layers kind of on top of this is that because we are prediction engines, right, because we only have a partial understanding, we don't really see reality as it is, right? We simulate reality, right? And so this isn't quite to say that we're living in a simulation, though if you guys want to talk about that, we can. It's more to say that if you think about it, like what are you taking in from your perceptions right now? You're taking in vibrations of sound into your ears. You're taking in pixels through your visual retina, right? You're taking in smells through your nose, right? Your touch and taste. And all of that needs to be synthesized together, integrated, right? And then needs to form a picture, right? Or a simulation of reality, right? But the thing is, there's actually an objective reality out there that might not be different, right? That's where, like, in theory, the way I see blue, right, could be different than the way you see blue, right? But we both have seen the same stimulus, and so we both agree this is blue. But really, your blue could be like my green, right? We could have flipped, right? And so, in that sense, how your brain is constructing these things will affect what you're able to ultimately see. And that kind of goes into this whole thesis of only having a partial understanding of the world, because as you're interacting with it, you're interacting it in your own way, right? You've only ever been you, so you don't know what it's like to be anyone else. You don't know what it's like to see blue in a slightly different way. All right, so I know I hit you with a lot. Before we jump to the next part, everything makes sense so far? Some question?
So reality is based on how we perceive it to be. So is it the same reality we're all seeing, we're just perceiving it differently, or is it a different reality for each person?
That's a good question. Right now we're getting into much larger, like what we call metaphysics and stuff like that. And it's up for debate, right? That's more philosophy than science at this point, because we just don't know. It feels like we're all in the same reality because we managed to organize and have schools and interact with each other and remember things. It's not like I remember one thing and you remember a different thing and we bump into each other. And so it seems like we have one reality, but perhaps not, right? Perhaps things are slightly different for each of us. I guess you guys probably have some level of understanding if you've seen Endgame, right? Or if you're in the Marvel universe, right? Like they start to touch on some of these kind of things. All right. So like from all of this, you kind of get to this idea that our brains are sort of like hardware and our minds are sort of like software running on top of that hardware, right? Hardware is like the physical computer, right? And software is like that algorithm, that recipe that you put on top of that computer, right? And so we can think of our brains as sort of like this biological hardware, right? And some things are kind of built into us as human beings, right? You're not going to be able to not eat, not sleep, right? Probably social interaction is part of that, right? And that's built into the fabric of kind of how our brains are set up. But then on top of that, right, comes this software layer, right? Which are these frameworks and filters that we get by taking in information, by learning things, by interacting with the world, right? That then determines how we're going to say things, how we're going to respond to things, who we want to interact with, who we don't want to interact with. And then kind of all of this culmination of all of this is this idea that we can then reprogram our minds, right? It's not as easy as a computer where you can just change the code and the thing changes automatically, right? Humans, as you know, right, you can't just be like, I want to be a nice person now, or like, I want to start exercising every day, right? The way that we change our software, right, or sort of like software, is with habits, right? And things we do day after day. That's why like this 21-day thing is so fundamental, right? Is because if you exercise for 21 days in a row, you're fundamentally changing your brain and how it's filtering the world, what frameworks it's using to process the world, right? And then that affects what you're operating under. And see, the thing about habits is saying that we do this with habits, right? But that's in the positive sense, right? When you have this, we are doing this, right? Where you're taking a step. The thing about habits is sometimes you're not in control, right? Sometimes the world is programming and reprogramming you, right? And so that's when we need to be super vigilant of what I call super stimulants, right? If you look at the history of humanity, we grew up mostly for tens of thousands of years, right? In hunter-gatherer tribes in a very primitive kind of manner that didn't have the amount of sugar that we intake, right? Didn't have the dopamine, the chemicals in our brain going off, right, from going on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat, right, every day. We didn't have the Netflix that streamed unlimited content, right? Even during my childhood, right, or like when I was a sophomore in high school, Netflix was still DVDs, or at the very least streaming was just getting started. Now streaming is ubiquitous, right? You guys have, literally, you probably all have laptops in your backpacks or have access to a computer pretty easily, where you could just sit there and watch Netflix all day, right? But the problem with that is it's going to erode your experience, right? If you only watch Netflix all day, you're not going to take care of yourself in all these other dimensions, right? And these super stimulants are capable of taking over and taking control of you, reprogramming you, right? Allowing you not to be in the driver's seat anymore. So I guess it's my kind of warning of being vigilant, right? And like drugs and things would go into that, but those are the obvious ones, right? That you probably already are hopefully aware of and know the power of them over your lives. But the more subtle ones, right? The things we look at, right? If you're looking at models in magazines all the time, right? Like that's not great for your brain, right? And it's going to affect how you view people and what you view as healthy and not.
So with the ideas of super stimulant, have you noticed any sort of connection with ideas of like anxiety depression type ideas? Has there been any kind of studies along those lines?
Yeah, I haven't jumped too much into the literature of it, but I imagine that would be connected to it, right? Or at the very least, are correlated, right? We're seeing levels of anxiety and suicide and depression, right, increase, right? And some of that might just be we're better at diagnosing it, or people are better at coming forward. But some of that might be that we're very increasingly getting these intense stimulation that we've never had before that can take over our lives and then lead us where we're not fulfilling some important stuff, right? Because we're watching on Netflix all day, we're neglecting our friends who are actually super important to our overall well-being. All right, before we jump into that, any questions about reprogramming our minds, brains, hardware, software, super stimulants?
So with reprogramming, would you count things like education as reprogramming or more as just programming?
I would probably say reprogramming, and that's a really good example. I actually was going to say that, and I didn't, so thank you for asking this question. But like, so not all reprogramming is bad, right? Some of it as a society, we've decided as a species we want to reprogram ourselves because when we're born, right, we're not born with knowing everything we need to know, right? And so in order to be contributing members to the very complex world we live in, right, we reprogram ourselves in a systematic way for 12, 13, 17, 22 years, right, depending on how long you go through education.
So I don't know if this question will make sense, but in Brave New World, I know how they were pre-programming a lot of things. Could it ever get to the point where we're pre-programming so we don't need to reprogram?
That's a really good question, potentially, right? If I'm looking at my field, and we'll kind of get into it, right? We're starting to getting to the point that in our lifetimes, right, or in our children's lifetime, we might hit that, right? But then the question becomes, should we, right? We have the power to, right? But do you think Brave New World ended up in a great society, right? Is there a way we could do that without ending up in Brave New World, right? And if we don't have this forethought, which currently we're kind of just doing the science and the forethoughts come in afterwards, so it's not even forethought, it's just post-thought, I guess. And so part of like why I'm here and telling you guys about this is so maybe even if you're not building this stuff, you can be part of the collective small group of minority of humans right now that are thinking about this stuff, right? And in your English classes, as you're going through this cross-curricular project, thinking about what does it mean to be human, right? How much reprogramming is okay, right? Because what if we reprogram ourselves to the point that we forget who our identities are, then what, right? Does that mean we're still individuals, right? There's a lot we can go down this road. I think that might have answered your question. Okay.
So is there any possible way that like the programming that system that like we've developed is a part of things that we can't go back on, things that we can't reprogram?
Yeah. So there's some things like kind of like where our need to eat, our need to sleep, right? That seem like it'd be really hard to like ever change that. And these like greater societal things, right? Like the fact that we're all being like in a way programmed by Netflix, right? Who knows? I would like to think we're still at the point of inflection that there's an ability to not allow this to control us, but the kind of very like disheartening part would be it'd be tough to know if that was the truth, right? If that was true, if it was true, if that makes sense, right? Because if we have no ability to reprogram ourselves to be able to not like to overcome super stimulants, right? We wouldn't. If we had no ability to do that, we wouldn't kind of probably have awareness into it, right? We'd try and then we'd fail, and then over time we would erode our experience and our road of our awareness and our consciousness, and we wouldn't fully grasp everything.
Just an example of being vigilant of those super stimulants and reprogramming, and you'll understand this, I think, a little more than they do. Before I read TOK essays, or before I do IOCs with IB, I have to consciously put my phone and computer away every day when I get home for a good week, and only be stimulated by like reading a book or reading articles in a magazine or something where I have to reprogram my attention span. And I have to do it for a while, because if I don't, trying to focus for a good 20 minutes while a student is talking and not miss a single point so I can evaluate them for their future, or read a TOK essay and be vigilant about this deep philosophy that they're trying to impart on me, I cannot do it if I don't reprogram myself. I lose track really quick of big ideas and deep thoughts because I'm so used to these super stimulants, right? Like constant change, and if I'm bored, switching to a different thing and whatever. So, but I can tell you, the longer the gap, the harder it is. You know, if I've gone months without having to be diligent about like reading something and being mindful of my attention span, it becomes longer. Like I got to do it for a couple weeks sometimes to really reprogram myself and get my mind and my body back into a spot where I can use some of those skills that I originally had programmed, right?
That's where habits are so important, right? It takes, if you have a 20-year habit, it's going to be much harder to break than a 2-week habit, right? And so I think in some ways, like the longer you go with it, right, the more difficult, right? And there's probably some ways where maybe you had a traumatic experience and that shakes you and you can be cold turkey on it and you can be done, where it's different, but I think that's a good kind of rule of thumb, a heuristic that you could use. And so I think the point that I would like to make as we're kind of going through this whole thing is personally I found that how we experience is much more than what we experience, right? You've probably all interacted with people who seem to have everything, who have money and status and significant others, and from an external perspective, they look like they're doing great, but you know their internal world doesn't match that. It has that depression or anxiety, right? And then you know people who seem like they have nothing, right? Like there are people who live in Africa on $1.15 a day or less, right? And who really enjoy your experience. And so that's where I've come to kind of the conclusion that like how we experience, right? If you really enjoy eating this strawberry, you cherish this conversation with a friend or family, right? Or you really like that run you went on, right? You're going to have a much better experience than if you don't, right? And the cool thing about the fact that our brains are so valuable is you can reprogram yourself, in my opinion, right? With habits and with immersing yourselves in an environment to improve how you experience stuff, right? Without having to pay for, because oftentimes it takes money to like change what you experience. And the kind of key thing to understand too is our world is really noisy today, right? Probably too much for us. If you go on the internet, you know that it's kind of tough to know what's true and what's not true, right? If you interact with people, you realize that there's 7 billion of us out there, right? And when we were talking about how you can only understand 10% or 5% or 1% of what's going on, that's not great for when you have to make decisions that are long-term and you have all these variables to keep track of. And so kind of the thesis that I'm working on is that we need to find ways to extend ourselves. So as I work in artificial intelligence, right, the goal is to build stuff that doesn't erode our experience, right, that doesn't take away our consciousness, our perspective, our understanding, but instead extends us, right, where maybe we don't have the time to go research this issue, but we can send this AI assistant to go research it for us, right? We know based on the transparency of how the algorithms work that it's going to do it in some kind of way that we would, exactly how we would, right? It would come back to us and give us that information, right? And we'd be able to act using that, right? So almost like a symbiotic relationship rather than allowing these algorithms to replace us, right? And completely stop how we're doing things today.
Do you think that that's possible in the capitalist system that we have? Because Google probably started with the same ideas, but at this point they're manipulating what information we receive to use their platform.
Yeah. I'm hopeful. So part of what I'm doing too is I'm joining a company that isn't Google, right? And we're trying to upend Google, right? We're trying to, this time, start with intentionality that recognizes that if we are super successful, right, and we do build a large corporation, we're not going to be in control of it anymore, right? So it starts when you're 20 people, like I'm joining, to be intentional about what our culture should be, right? So like, for example, we're really big about work-life balance. So we work 40 hours a week, and we don't work any more than that, right? We get 26 days of vacation, right? Like it's intentional that we want to live in a society, as we automate a lot of things, right? And we become more productive, we don't allow that to then cause us to work more, right? Or we recognize that we don't need to work more as we become more productive because life is more than just work, right? And so if you start in the beginning, my hope, right? If you start in the beginning with these are our values, these are our principles, and then once you grow those, you can hopefully maintain those, then we'll end up in hopefully not a situation. So like a big problem with Google, right, is they didn't think through what happens if we optimize, what happens if we make our business model based on ad revenue? Right, well, the way ad revenue works is it's the more attention, like more eyeballs we have on our ads, the more money we're gonna make, right? Which causes them, once they've become a large corporation, right, which causes them to then optimize for keeping you in their ad, right? No matter how you actually feel, no matter how your life actually is, right? They want your eyeballs on it because that's what makes them money, right? And now, and even the Facebooks of the world, they're starting to figure out that this was a very, very bad business model because it's eroding people's lives, right? It's causing them to have this depression, this anxiety, right? To not feel as good anymore because this eyeballs at whatever cost, right, proved to not be the best business model. So if you're intentional in the beginning about your business model, right, finding a way you can make money and create value for people, I think you'll be better off, right? So if Google had, I don't know exactly how they could have done it, but they would charge like $5 a month, right, per person, right, which I think most people would pay for that, right? That might have been a better way of doing it than this kind of ads-based business model. But I guess at the time, right, it didn't seem like all this stuff was going to be that significant. They didn't know that they were going to be one of 5 corporations that are now basically running the world. And so, but the problem is that when you're that small, if you don't think through it, then there's a chance you end up being them. Especially if you try to be them, right? So we're kind of talking doom and gloom and stuff like that. So maybe a bit more of a positive note, hopefully some level of inspiration for you guys to kind of think through how are you going to like navigate this world, right? And I think there's this isn't from me, this is from a blog I like called Wait But Why. I think I include it later in the presentation too. But there's a concept of people who are cooks and chefs, and we all are cooks and chefs in different areas, right? But cooks are the people that follow the recipe, right? Cooks are the people that at McDonald's, right, that follow the exact same order, right? And there's no creativity to it, there's no problem solving to it. While chefs are people who invent and create new things. They use their individuality to try new things, experiment, and then they are the ones that come up with new things, right? That invent the Googles of the world. And we're all cooks and chefs, kind of like a spectrum, right? Like some people are cooks when it comes to actual cooking, and some people are chefs when it's actual cooking, right? But some people are cooks when it comes to driving, and some people are chefs when it comes to driving, right? And you kind of are gonna like find yourself on that spectrum somewhere. And I guess my kind of recommendation is find the things that you really enjoy and try and be a chef in them, right? Because computers are really good at being cooks, right? They're really good at following recipes, but what they really struggle at today is having any level of curiosity or creativity or true individual problem solving, right? So when possible, try and be a chef. And so kind of in summary of this first section, the inputs we take in alter our frameworks and filters over time. So I kind of gave you some insight into how I'm thinking about the world, my kind of frameworks and filters I'm using, right? And those have been from input, right, over time. Like I've read things, I've talked to people, I studied here, I studied at the University of Michigan, right? And they change how we interpret and respond, right? Like you all know, like when you learn something and it changes your entire understanding of the world, right? And that's part of growing up is you kind of lose your innocence over time and you learn stuff, right? And that's you developing some frameworks and filters. And so just be cognizant about how you're doing it, and I think you'll have a much better experience in this life if you do. And so with that, I guess there's the last part, which is we can't forget to figure out what is the humanity, right? Because if we are kind of like computers and we are like algorithms, and this thesis turns out to be true, and we start to in a way merge with these computers that we've built, right? Where does our humanity kind of lie in that, right? And what we were talking about earlier with the lady's question over here is that there's a lot of things we're going to be able to do, but should we do them, right? And we have the opportunity, our generation has the opportunity to write the narrative for humanity going forward, right? This can be an inflection point where we go upward and we create much better lives for all of us, or it can lead to a much more dangerous world, right? If you read 1984 by George Orwell, that's a possibility. Or Brave New World, right, by Aldous Huxley, that's a possibility. And there's probably 10s and 20s and 30s more that weren't kind of defined by our science fiction, but that might come true if we just allow this, right, as you mentioned with capitalism, right, if we allow capitalism to just go in that direction without only optimizing for profit, right? Because oftentimes, as you guys have probably seen in your lives, if you only optimize for profit, if you only try and go after profit, you're probably not going to end up in a situation. If you only optimize for clicks, or you only optimize for eyes on your platform, you're probably not going to end up with the best experience for everybody. And so it's our job, whether you're in AI or you're in biology or you're in whatever, right? It's going to be, you're going to be part of the humanity, hopefully, right, if you're a contributing member, right, of figuring this out. And I think we'll probably figure it out in our lifetimes for the rest of humanity. With that, I'll give you 3 minutes to think, stretch. You don't have to think about this if you don't want to. I know it was a lot. And then we'll jump back in and see how I'm applying this in my life. I'll be up here to answer any questions. I hope you guys have managed to not stimulate yourselves too much so that we can jump back into it and we can do more stimulation. So what I'm going to talk about is the inputs, right, that are going into me, right, that I think are forming the person I'm kind of like, right? So the goal here is to hopefully now be able to see how I'm applying these frameworks and filters, right? Not just the thinking part, but the kind of immersing myself in the world. All right, so first at Michigan, I studied cognitive science. It's the intersection of computer science, linguistics, psychology, and philosophy, right? So there's not one department, right? Very similar to the cross-curriculum project you guys are doing with English and history. It's actually not just 2 subjects, but 4 of them, right? And your major is all of them collectively understanding, right? So it gives you this broader perspective that I hope you saw was reflected in kind of my framework and my filters. And the entire premise of it is to study how to build a mind, right? Like humans have minds, we know, or at least we think they have minds, right? I think you guys all have minds, similar to how I think I have my own minds, right? But then it's a matter of, okay, if humans have them, could we build them in computers? Could we build them in other things, right? Do they exist, right? What are their properties? And so that's what cognitive science is going after. And the recognition is that you can't just study computer science and know it. You can't just study linguistics and know it. You can't study psychology and know it, philosophy and just know it, right? You need all of these disciplines that each bring their own lenses, their own frameworks, their own filters. I said another thing that our inputs are friends. They keep me grounded and connected. First guy on the left is Brendan, who graduated with me. Something cool that I found out this week is he hired my friend Cameron Razdar to be his intern. He works on the Hill in Washington, D.C. And so to be surrounded by someone like that, from high school, right, that continued to be closer to even over college, is an input that like really benefits me, right? That keeps me grounded and connected. The middle guy is Joe from Long Island. He's my best friend in college. He's really into building electric cars, and he's working at Tesla. And then Ray, he's like one of the most different people I've ever met from me. He grew up in a small town in China and is now a PhD, 10 years older than me, building robotics at the University of Michigan, right? But by surrounding myself, right, and you probably heard, like, you're the average of the 5 people you interact with, right? Like, here's 3 of my 5, or 3 of my 50, or however many of those people I actually have, right? But those inputs are gonna affect the person I become, how I see the world, the frameworks and filters I use. Family is, like, super important to me. Probably at this point for you, it wasn't for me, as Mr. Isley can probably attest, and Mr. Jollis a bit. But as you leave for university, right, and you are away from your parents, and you're away from your sister or your brother, you come to realize how important they are and how they're going to be there for you in a way that friends can't, right? In a way that you're almost biologically tuned, right, to keep that circle, like the most inner circle for you, right, besides yourself, is your family. And if you don't feel that now, I think you might in the future. At least I have. Mentors use their experience to guide me. So the guy on the left went through, when he was a child, he went through, basically, he grew up in a country called Kosovo in Eastern Europe, and the Serbians attempted to eliminate his entire population, right? So at 10 years old, he came to the United States, and now has started a company in Detroit trying to build the fastest internet in the world. Right? And I had the opportunity to work for him, but think about how that affects your filters and your frameworks, having gone through that, right? And so he has 100% crazy tolerance for risk, right? Like, there's no risk big to it, right? Because, you know what I mean, if it feels risky to like start a business, like that's nothing compared to having your race almost eliminated by other people. The middle guy's name is Steve. He was one of my professors. I took 2 or 3 classes with him, and then did an independent study with him where he taught me a lot about computational linguistics and kind of allowed me to carve this path that isn't really common at all, even at the University of Michigan, which kind of springboarded me into this role that I'm going to in Berlin. The last guy, Charvel, he actually is another Clarkson High School grad. He graduated in 2013, so he's significantly older than you guys. But he also went to Michigan, and he was kind of my mentor in high school, and then became my mentor in college, and now even to this day, he's helping me. He's now at Dell. He's working on their BIOS team, which is like the bootloader for the operating system. Like, and you guys, this probably doesn't mean anything to you, it barely means anything to me, but point is, he's wicked smart. He's working at Dell in Austin, Texas. But all these people, right, like in addition to having friends and family that are great inputs, having people that can have gone through things that you have gone through and can give you input is great. Structure, I found, is super important, especially for my health. So like physical, mental, emotional health, right? Like when I came to college, I was like, I don't need structure. I'll just party all day, and I'll study all day, and I'll do all this stuff. Well, what you find out is it's very easy for you to stop working out, right? To not feel the greatest, to allow your mind to go in so many different ways. And so what I personally found is, doing a 3-hour morning routine is helpful for me, right? That probably sounds intense, as you can probably tell, I'm an intense person. So, but point is, these are the inputs that I've recognized that I need to go for a run every day, and that changes my brain, and that allows me to interact with the world in how I want to. Experience pushed me to grow my perspective. So in the last year, I went to China. I visited startups in Beijing and Shanghai, and then there's a photo of me on the Great Wall. Once again, mind-blowing experience, pushed my perspective. I did a 45-mile hike of the rim to rim of the Grand Canyon this past spring break. Once again, a mind-blowing perspective. It's crazy to be outdoors for 7 days in a row, right? To not shower, right? To sleep in a tent, right? I had never done that, and you don't really understand how your frameworks and filters are going to be adjusted until you do that. And then the last one on the right is a couple weeks ago I ran the Boston Marathon, which is absolutely an incredible experience. If you're into running, highly, highly recommend. The fastest runners from the world all come around, and I was on the bus riding to the start line, and I was almost crying because it was the people around you, right, are just so into it. And even the city of Boston, they shut down, and everybody takes the day off. All the college kids party, and then all the parents party too. They cheer you on, and you have literally 30 miles of just people cheering you. And it's super hard, and it's a marathon, so I was a bit underprepared, finishing my last semester of college and then also training. But I finished, so that was the important part. Reading is a fast way to live multiple lives. So I gotta say, books are the best still. They're hard to beat. The Hate You Give is a wonderful book if you guys have read it.
I'm trying to get the curriculum.
Are you? Yeah, it's a great book. And there's a new movie, but I haven't seen the movie yet.
Yeah.
We're watching it in, you like Sandy.
Oh, nice. Second runner-up, I would say, is blogs. Wait But Why is the one where I got the chef versus coach framework. They tend to be longer form posts. And then Twitter's pretty good for kind of seeing how other people think, seeing their frameworks and filters. But remember, like we were talking about super stimulants, where it's only like 150 or 280 characters, and so you very quickly read one, then you read the next one, right? You read the next one, and you don't really remember it in the same way. It doesn't have the same saliency that like a book or a long-form blog post is. But reading kind of gives you the ability to step into other people's frameworks and filters, right? And that's why it's super important. Writing allows me to disentangle my thoughts, something I hated doing, right? Like taking notes right now. Like I would never be, I would have been not taking notes, right? And what I found when I came to college is that writing notes was super important because as you start to get more complex frameworks and filters, it becomes really difficult to keep track of everything, right? So writing it down forces you to compress it, right? To take that information and compress it into something that other people can read and then help you with, right? It's great. It's a great clarity exercise, in my opinion. Coding has turned out to be a way that I can turn my ideas into reality and then scale them. I think the way the future is going, I've come across someone who thinks that in the future, maybe it'd be 50 or 500 years, but currently we are like reading, writing, and arithmetic are kind of the three main competencies we try and build into every human. The idea is maybe coding will be the fourth one we add on. And it may not feel that way right now, but it might, with time, it might come to be. And that's just because of like this idea of scaling. You just have so much leverage when you can code something, when you can write a script to do something for you versus have to manually kind of process it. Moving to Berlin allows me to build bridges. So as you've noticed with our country and just the world in general, we're becoming very nationalistic, right? In addition to that, this kind of European project, right, if you're watching Brexit at all, right, is in question. And I want to be someone that says, like, as much as I love the United States, I also love humanity, right? And I want to be that person that kind of helps connect us, right? And I think that's super important because, like, as we're talking about perspective and understanding, a big part of that is going to be having those actual person-to-person interactions. And so while there's still the opportunity, I'm like, I gotta take it, right? Because who knows, maybe in 10 years or 50 years, our country goes in a way where I can't live in Europe, right? And so when I have no responsibilities, I might as well. So what am I gonna be doing in Europe? I'm going to be building the infrastructure necessary for software to interface with humans via natural language. So what that means is I'm building computers that can talk to people in the same way that people talk to people. Right? And so what we're doing is we're building the software that allows engineers to build these services. So we have many clients from Airbus to Toyota to many European companies that you probably haven't heard of. But point being, right, what it allows you to do is more efficiently interface with human beings, right, in a more seamless, natural kind of way. It allows you to take unstructured text, right, that we're generating on all times. Right now I'm generating it as I speak, right, and turn it into something that computers can understand. And once computers can understand it, then they can automate a lot of the things that are repetitive for us. But part of that, like we talked about, right, is this is a great vision, right, and we might be able to achieve it, but as we become a large corporation, we might not have control of where it goes, right? It might cause us to lead to lives that we don't like. And so our mission as a company is to empower all makers to create AI assistants that work for everyone, right? So we're open sourcing our code, which means we're giving it away for free, right? We're allowing anybody, whether they're in India or in Brazil or in the United States, to build using it, right? And our goal is to democratize this technology so that the Googles and the Chinas of the world are not the only ones that have access to this technology.
So how do you know that these people, when this AI becomes available, you know that these people won't use that as a source to, like how do you know that they won't just stop talking to people and only?
Yeah, that's part of my worry. Like there's a startup out there that is, so this woman, her boyfriend died, and so she was like, I miss him. So she took all of his messages, right, from Facebook Messenger, iMessage, put it into a neural network, right, and then now she can message him, right? Like message him, right, but really it's just a neural net full of his data, right, that responds sort of like him, because it's just pattern matching, right? And so then she built a startup out of it where you can, I won't tell you the app because I know how you can use it, but you can download it, right, and you can start talking to it, and then it takes your information and it puts it into the neural network, and it becomes more like you over time, right? And so you don't have this, that sounds like a Black Mirror if you've heard that, right? Like and so I guess the answer to your question is we can't, right? my thesis is it's more likely that if we have transparency and we have forethought and we have everyone being able to work together on this, that we're going to end up in a better solution than if we allow large corporations like Google and China to determine the future, right? Because more than likely they have incentives, right, that aren't aligned with the rest of humanity, while if you give humanity, if we can find a way to give humanity control of where this is going to go, which is what we're in a way trying to do, right? The idea is hopefully maybe, right, if we get enough people around this, we'll be able to keep that from happening. But who knows? But that's why I'm going into this, right? Because if I'm not going, if I don't go into it, right, then it's going to happen without me, and I'm going to have no ability to control it, right? No ability to make an impact with it. And so my goal is to be in there and try and figure out how can we keep that from happening. And lastly, like my personal mission right now is to maximize consciousness in the universe, right? So as we build these technologies, I want us to become more aware, more educated, have more perspective, right? And all of these things that feel like, at least for me right now, are what make us more human, right? Than these cold-blooded, I guess there's no blood, but just cold machines, right? And so as we kind of merge with them, as we extend ourselves with them, right, always keeping in mind this tension that we're trying to not cause ourselves to be replaced, right? We're trying to cause ourselves to be augmented. And so one of the also important inputs is giving back, which allows me to accelerate others like they've done for me, right? So I like to think that there was students, older students that came in, had an impact on me, like I hopefully am having an impact on you. And even though I'm not probably going to get anything out of it from you guys, right? Like the theory is that someone gave it to me, and then I am now giving it to you guys, and then you guys will be able to come in and then give it to future students, right? And that can look like this, so giving a lecture, or it can just be how you interact with other people, right? But the theory, at least, is that if everyone kind of thinks like this, we can end up in a world where we're all giving positive inputs to other people. And then lastly, I think the most important thing is, like, as I give you all of this, right, is I'm not certain that this is right. I'm not certain that I'm very certain that I don't know everything, right? I'm very certain I'm going to learn more. And Mr. Isaac can attest that even this presentation I gave last year was so much different than the one I gave this year, right? And I guarantee if I gave one the year after it would be dramatically different. But the key here is to have that growth mindset, right? To use feedback, right? Every time you interact with new information, like today, right, find a way to integrate it into your life and to become a better, more aware person, right, using that information, if it's good. But the other part is you have to have good judgment, right? You have to develop the filters, right, to make sure that you're only updating your framework in positive ways, right? The super stimulants, right, as we talked about, could very easily cause us to be impacted in negative ways. Any questions?
I know it's a lot to take in, and we do have a few minutes, but I'm sure Ty's willing to stay here and answer questions as you have them. I know we threw a lot at you, and hopefully you saw the explicit or implicit connections to conformity and nonconformity. But are there any questions for Ty that, whether it's about him personally and his philosophy, or how he sees the world, or the work he's doing, or even your own thoughts right now about humanity, conformity and nonconformity?
Do you have like a specific repo for Rasa and what they're doing? Like, do you
Yeah,
have
so it's
a,
all on GitHub.
do you have a link for it, or is it just like?
GitHub.com/RasaHQ.
Okay, thank you.
RASAHQ. So you can actually look at the source code for it, and you can use it. And like, I built a chatbot with it in 10 hours. Right? It maybe it'll take you a bit longer, but that's the point. Is it can be put in the hands of people like you, and you'll do stuff with it that we never imagined, and hopefully for the better. Okay, how do I recognize younger generations adopting this technology compared to older generations? Mostly anecdotal right now, but if you look at like young children, like I've seen them try to talk to like lights on the side of sidewalks and say, Alexa, what is the weather? Or I was on an airplane and this little kid tried talking to Alexa while being in the front seat, right? And so the way, because they're growing up with it, it's almost like you guys and cell phones, or you guys and the internet, right? Or me and the internet. And so it's just part of life, right? And then when it's something that's part of life, you're less willing to question it, right? You're less willing to be like, is this good for us, right? Because it's a super stimulant that's always kind of been there. My hope is they will be able to be at lectures like this, or that you guys will pass on this kind of information to them. That way, over time, they realize that just because the way the world works right now is like this doesn't mean that it always has to or always will.
I think that generation gap in thoughtfulness can be recognized. Like, my parents were totally resistant to technology. I think our generation knows the world before and is now in this world, and so we have a healthy cynicism, right? Like, we're like, question, is it, where like my kids, I'm constantly having to remind them about certain things, about how to use it, and why it's important, that it's only a tool to augment your own thinking and things of that nature. It is heartening to see, like you said, that coding and the discussion of the building of technology, what technology is and what it does for us, is those discussions are being had at younger levels. Like, my son is at a coding camp, and during media center time, my daughter could go in and play on a coding program, right? Like, it's happening at younger ages, so hopefully they're becoming a little bit more aware of the complexity of it, hopefully.
I just wanted to add to what Isley said, but it's not just like a generational thing, like this generation doesn't like technology, this generation understands it, and this generation accepts it. It's almost because of at the speed technology is advancing, it's a yearly thing. Because my sister's only 3 years younger than me, but we have completely different relationships with technology because I just use it for like writing and stuff. But my sister, our parents have had to set physical time limits on her phone where it literally will shut down so that way she doesn't use it too much, because she will do that because that's the relationship that her and her friends her age have with it versus the relationship that me and my friends have with it.
And I think the implicit thing that I didn't really go into because I don't have that much time is you've hit it right on the nail on the head, is that technology is accelerating, right? If you look at like what we've, like from Uber to Airbnb to Spotify, all these things that have happened in the last 10 years is almost double what we had from 1998 to 2008, right? And if we watch the trends, it's probably going to double again from 2018 to 2028, right? And then it's going to double again from 2028 to 2038. And it's going to continue to double, right? So what ends up happening, rather than the linear curve that we think is occurring, right? Because we look at our lives and see this linear line, what in reality is happening is this exponential. Right? So that's where I'm saying in our lifetimes we'll have the ability to affect the outcome of all this technology, because if it stays on this exponential trend, it's going to just kind of shoot off to the stars, and that's going to be what humanity is like, and that's going to be the lives that we have, right? And because we're at the bottom of the curve, we have the opportunity to decide where that curve goes and what it looks like.
All right, I want to be respectful of your time, so go ahead and go to lunch. If you need to stay behind for some reason, go ahead.